Good morning, everyone. Today I'm with.
Ezana Habte-Gabr.
Okay, Ezana, can you tell us about your research?
Okay, first I want to thank you for your invitation. I also want to thank the Center for Language and Cultures for offering me this opportunity to work on this research. This research is in an area that comes from applied linguistics, which is basically we've been looking at integrating content. Here by content, we're referring to geography. In the case of our research, we focused on teaching vocabulary and processing the learning of vocabulary through the use of thematic maps. So this comes under the rubric of an area called CLIL, which is Content Language Integrated Learning. So the idea is as students interact with the thematic maps, looking at different data about crime, business, and other areas, they will begin to internalize the vocabulary and at the same time learn about maps and geography. So it's what's called a dual approach to learning, a 2-for-1.
Can you tell me why have you choose Japan as country of the main topic for the research?
Okay, Japan is was an area of research because my colleague, my co-investigator, Jong Guy Peram, has been working in the same area. And we found some very interesting observations. First is the language. It's what's called the first language, or what in linguistics is called L1. The Japanese students have a language that's completely distant from English, as opposed to the Colombian students who speak Spanish, and their language, because of Latin as roots and other, Greek, etc., is more similar. So we found that our students here in Colombia, I would say it's probably the case in other countries in Latin America, were more familiar with the vocabulary that we gave, because there are terms like state, estado, which they were familiar with, which probably was not the case with Japanese students. This, in our paper, entered the discussion part, where we talked about why results were different. Initially, we did what's called a pre-test to see what students know, and then we did a post-test. You do a post-test after you do an intervention, a pedagogical intervention in this whole area of what's called action research. So basically we had students here and in Japan, in Muroran, identify a list of vocabulary. So yes, there are more cognates and false cognates. So there are words that sound the same but have a different meaning. So in our study we found out that that was an issue. We did in our pre-test, we found out that our students here obviously did better because they are more familiar with the words. But in the post-test, after we did the intervention with the maps, we found that in the post-test, the Japanese had a slightly higher level than our students. In the pre-test, our students did better because of what I've just mentioned. So generally, our results were, in both cases, we found that there was an improvement in learning. This CLIL approach, this content language integrated learning approach, did work. We found that there was dual learning, so students learned vocabulary, the language part, and they also learned about thematic maps from the content part. Both of us, the study was piloted through classes, normal classes. In our case here, it was done in a level 6 class, which looked at these specific areas. So if you look at the English X program, we talk about issues that are related to business, to crime, etc. These were what our maps were largely about. So it kind of coincided with what we're doing here and the course that John Guy is teaching there.
With how many students you guys made the research?
Our studies here and in Japan had about 20 students, between 19 to 20 students. This was conducted in the second semester of 2022.
For example, the pandemic during 2020 will affect your research or investigation, because the whole dynamics are different. Everything changed. It's not the same a face-to-face class that virtual class.
Well, this was actually done in our first virtual classes when we returned.
Oh, okay,
Yeah.
okay.
Now, it's interesting you bring up the question of the pandemic.
Uh-huh.
The idea of one of the issues that has occurred in research around the world is during the pandemic was comparative studies.
Okay.
So everybody was in their house or in their home.
Uh-huh.
So a lot of people in research, and not only in language teaching but in other areas, began to look for peers in other
Uh-huh.
countries and say, look, since we have maybe a little more time and within the comfort of our homes, we could start doing comparative studies.
Uh-huh.
So this issue of comparative studies, and we mentioned this in the paper, was also kind of emanated from during the pandemic. We also believe that geographic learning has kind of declined because of the pandemic. So our reason for bringing this in was also to kind of redress the disparities that came about because of the pandemic. And we think that geographic learning was also impacted because people live in an aspatial world.
Yes.
People are communicating with people around the world, and they don't see any really immediate need to know where they are. Mm-hmm. We live in this virtual world. Mm-hmm. So we believe that geography has has moved geography to the back burner. So that was another reason. So the pandemic did have quite an effect in terms of doing research and also in terms of doing comparative research. So people around the world were like wondering about what's going on over there.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
And can you explain me a little bit how does that maps works?
Okay.
Yes.
A thematic map is generally there are several types of thematic maps. Mm-hmm. One is basically a statistical map, where you have higher data, higher numbers are represented by darker images. So if you have a map of South America, and if you have a map, let's say, of specific data, such as GNP, gross national product, countries that have a higher gross national product will be shaded darker. So basically you're transferring statistics to a more visionary way of representing it. And that was another thing that we've emphasized in the paper, the importance of having visual learning, and that's what maps do. And what's also great about this is it facilitates place location knowledge. People, one of the problems with geographical education is it's always based on memorization. Uh-huh. So it creates a reason for learning about these areas. So before you know it, you already know where places are because you've been looking at data and information. So it's kind of more of a meaningful learning approach. Then we also have other types of thematic mapping where you work with dots. So you have a blank map or just with the labels of places where dots, the size of dots, reflect a number. Yeah, so a larger circle maybe reflects that there's more of X data. The other area is more locating activities. So you can look at areas where there is population density. Mm-hmm. So you can look at a thematic map and you can actually look at the concentration of data. And that's actual real insight information. So if you look at a map of Colombia, you will notice that the darker areas, because the dots represent a certain amount of population. So where you have a high concentration, there will be the urban areas. As you go through the process of your analysis, you will begin to know where places are. So it creates a meaningful reason for learning. And you're able to kind of decipher spatially the information. Because often we associate this type of not trivial knowledge for games and things like that. But this is actually putting things into use, and as a result, you begin to learn where places are.
Ezana, finally, what conclusion have you guys found from these studies?
Our conclusion is that the use of thematic maps fosters learning vocabulary. The use of thematic maps also fosters a learning in more in-depth vocabulary usage and also knowledge of maps. So we found that this study, this approach kind of provides a forum for the dual language and content learning. In fact, right now we are in the process of formulating our next study.
Okay.
Our next study is going to be focusing on the United Nations Development Program's development plan. We will be implementing this study in next semester. And the idea is we'll be focusing on a database, which is a spatial database of the United Nations Development Program.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Ezana, for your time, for accepting this invitation, for being here today. And well, we're looking forward to do more of this content.
Thank you very much for the invitation. I also want to thank the Center for Language and Culture for its interest and the time also for being able to do this study.
Okay, have a good
You
day,
too.
Ezana. Okay.
Bye.